to today's Medical Alley webinar titled Old Ideas, New Innovations, Unlocking the Full Potential of MedTech Innovation. My name is Ben Wagner. I'm the Director of Communications here at Medical Alley and your host for today's conversation. First, I do want to extend a special thank you to Resonant Medical for making today's webinar possible. Their team has been and continues to be an incredible resource to our community, an excellent example of the innovation that exists within this community, developing wireless power technologies that enable smaller, safer, and more reliable implantable medical devices. So thrilled to continue this partnership here today. And we are excited to bring together an outstanding panel of experts, I should say, to explore really what I think is a powerful idea, and that's many of the technologies that are shaping the future of MedTech are not entirely new, but are being re-engineered, integrated, and applied in new ways that unlock their full clinical and commercial potential. So today's conversation really will take a look at how forward-thinking companies are revisiting established technologies and challenging long-standing assumptions about how devices are designed, powered, and brought to market. So with that, I am pleased to welcome today's speakers. Here with us today is Esther Novosel, the CEO of Neuroloop. Neuroloop is tackling hypertension in a new way using a proprietary cuff electrode wrapped around the vagus nerve to treat uncontrolled hypertension by selectively stimulating specific nerve fibers. Esther is a healthcare people leader with a proven track record of several strategic and commercial roles across the medtech industry. Also with us here today is Kent Leidy, the CEO of Cadence Neuroscience. Cadence Neuroscience uses personalized electrical stimulation that detects and modulates neural activity to help people with drug-resistant epilepsy live seizure-free. An engineer by training, Kent is an established technologist, team builder, and leader as well. And finally, here with us today is the CEO of Resonant Medical, Omari Bouknight. Omari brings more than 2 decades of experience in senior leadership roles, commercializing novel technologies, medical technologies globally. I'll have each of our panelists do a little bit more of an in-depth dive into their background here in just a moment. Esther, Kent, Omari, I'm thrilled to have each of you with us here today. Really excited for this conversation. Before we begin, I wonder if each of you could tell us just a little bit more about yourselves. And Omari, I will pick you to start first.
Great, thanks, Ben, and thanks to Medical Alley for supporting this conversation. It's fantastic to be here. I am Omari Bouknight, CEO of Resonant Medical. My background has been working on implantable medical technologies since the early 2000s, first in cardiac rhythm management, then in left ventricular assist devices, then on into structural heart and electrophysiology. So I like to say I've had the opportunity to take a tour of the heart before landing here at Resonant Medical, working on platform technology that I'm very excited about, where we have developed a technology stack that enables efficient and safe wireless power transfer and data transfer for active implantables. So excited to be here today, excited for the discussion.
Omari, thank you. Esther, I will turn it over to you next.
Thank you, Ben. It's also a pleasure for me to be here. Thanks for the invite. And thanks to Medical Alley. So my name is Esther Novosel. I'm the CEO of Neuroloop. My background is I'm a biochemist, and I spent several years in startups as well as big corporations before I joined Neuroloop. And I have experiences in the field in ECMO, echo to R, dialysis. Then I spent some time with pacemakers and now with neurostimulation devices. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Great to have you with us here today. Last but not least, I'll go to Kent.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you again. Esther, nice to meet you. Kent Leidy. I'm CEO of Cadence Neuroscience. I was trained as an electrical engineer, and I still do a lot of electrical engineering, thankfully. Those are really my technical roots. And I've done everything in electrical engineering from precision analog to high-speed digital to signal processing and a lot of software and lots of things like that. So those are my favorite areas. Been doing medical devices since the 90s, and mostly in the context of venture-funded startup companies. I know a lot of folks here probably from Minneapolis, so the defibrillators hanging on the wall at your airport are something I contributed to back at my first startup, HeartStream, which is now owned by Philips. And along the way, got really interested in neuroscience and the potential for medical devices to help patients who suffer from various neurodiseases. And, as we all know, the brain is kind of an electrical place. And so if for electrical engineers, it ends up that we share a language with our clinician collaborators, which is nice. So Cadence is, as Ben mentioned, we're working on developing a new therapy for epilepsy that we licensed from Mayo Clinic. I will add the qualifying note that everything at this point is all investigational, and so it's early stage for us. For a preclinical stage company, and hope one day to move things along and have a new option for patients.
Kent, I actually saw one of those defibrillators yesterday. I was with someone from Philips, and I had them take a picture at the state capitol, so I know exactly the products you're talking about there. So thank you all for being here. So to get us started, I really wanted to zoom out a bit for today's conversation, because at the heart of this conversation, really, when you look across MedTech, many of the technologies shaping the field today aren't actually new, but in many cases, they have existed for years or maybe even decades. What is new, though, maybe is about how they're being approached and how they're integrated within systems, or how development teams may be thinking about them to solve some real clinical challenges. So I'd love to start really by exploring kind of that shift in thinking. And Omari, I'll turn back to you to begin. I wonder if you might be able to share an example in your field where the technology wasn't really the real limitation, but maybe the way it was approached was.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think wireless power transfer is a great example of that. I think in a lot of these situations, there have been concepts or ideas that have been interesting, but perhaps it just takes some out of the box thinking to really unlock the full potential. And wireless power transfer is a good example. There's a lot of, I guess you could say, parents, as they say, of the success around wireless power transfer. But suffice to say, one is clearly Nikola Tesla, who in the late 1800s essentially demonstrated that at length you could power light bulbs, which I think was very inspiring to a lot of people. But as we continue to focus on different methods for wireless power transfer, most focus on using induction-based charging, there were a lot of limitations, and most of those limitations had to do with the fact that there was a lot of temperature loss in the coils themselves that were driving the wireless power transfer. So that really existed for many decades, and I think in terms of its application to medical science, led to a lot of frustration in terms of how do you power implantable devices, particularly when things get too hot. That's obviously really problematic for the skin. It's also problematic in terms of wait time and things of that nature. So the roots of Resonant Link Medical were really to attack that in a different way, to say, well, what if you could optimize the way that current flows through the windings themselves, and introducing capacitance was a way to do that and really allow for much more efficient charging. And so it's a way of being, I'd say, kind of disruptive to what a traditional approach has been.
Kent, same question to you. What's an example in your field where the technology wasn't the limiting factor, but the way that it was viewed or approached was?
Something that's very common in medical devices is we're very invested in certain ways of doing things. And oftentimes that involves older technology. Nestor will probably tell us about different ways to build neural interfaces. At Cadence, we're still building things in kind of a old-fashioned way with, it looks like jewelry, bits of platinum and expensive wire and laser welds and things like that. So we can, it's just fine for us. But oftentimes the things that prevent us from going to newer technologies and we're in a very expensive, high inertia kind of space, and you have to be particular about where you choose to innovate. So oftentimes it comes down to, we know we can apply the latest, greatest, coolest technology, but does it make sense? And generally speaking, my rule of thumb is we'll pick, one or two or two and a half places where we're going to maybe stick our necks out and employ a new technology, but it needs to be something that really delivers for the patient and the clinician. It has to be, we're not going to do it to put cup holders in a product. We're going to do it because it makes a fundamental contribution, and then it becomes, worth worth bringing in that new technology. So it's a balancing act. There's a balancing act in a lot of medical device programs.
Yeah, and the true heart of innovation, right? Making that meaningful difference in a patient's life. I think that's really important too. Esther, same question to you here too.
We are doing at Neuroloop is we do vagus nerve stimulation to treat chronic diseases where medical treatment has failed. But vagus nerve stimulation by itself, I mean, it's I guess it was 1997 when the FDA approved the first bipolar cuff electrode. So the technology is quite out there for a while. But we asked ourselves, if you look at the vagus nerve, it's a quite heterogeneous nerve with consisting of many fibers and controlling and regulating numerous of body functions. Does it really make sense to use a bipolar cuff electrode that stimulates a huge surface of this nerve and stimulates a lot of fibers if you want to treat a specific and single indication? And that was the beginning that we started to shift our minds and thought about selectivity. What if we would use a different approach to really stimulate very selective the fiber that matters in this patient?
And Esther, I'll stay with you on that. I'm curious about that thought process of that change of when maybe you realized that the old way of thinking about your technology needed to change.
And it was exactly the moment when we looked at the composition on the nerve and realizing the huge potential, so many indications you could potentially treat if you find the right spot in each and every patient, but not with the systems existing out there. And then there was a momentum because the current electrodes or the electrodes until now were mostly silicon based, and there was no technological opportunity to realize the selectivity. But with the time, I mean, technologies and new materials advanced, and therefore we decided to go for a thin film technology and used photolithographic methods to create a very only 15 micron thin multi-channel cuff that enables us now to precisely stimulate the single defined point.
Omari, I wanted to turn to you. You brought up the example of Nikola Tesla going back in the late 1800s about the ability to wirelessly charge. When did you maybe realize the old, or from Resonant Link Medical's perspective, when did the old way of thinking of this technology, when did that need to change?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a really interesting article in the Atlantic back in 2014, and the title was essentially "Who Killed the Rechargeable Pacemaker?" And if you read that article, it's fascinating to think about the benefits about having a device that could be rechargeable, because essentially you can make the device smaller. You can often, a lot of times, integrate a lot more intelligence in the device, and you can also make the device last longer versus non-rechargeable systems. But essentially at the time, what you had was a very inadequate way of needing to recharge these devices that weren't patient friendly. And I love what Kent and Esther are leading towards, which is essentially a patient-focused approach. And if you think about why implantable technologies are beneficial to patients, one of the reasons is that they take compliance away from the patient. The patient doesn't have to remember to take a pill at a special time, in a very regulated and regimented fashion. It takes compliance off the table as an issue. On the other hand, the device then needs to be more forgettable for the patient. The patient doesn't want to always have to think about working on it. So who killed the rechargeable pacemaker? In some senses, it was the technology that was available at the time that was very burdensome to the patient. And we all know through experiences, when we have a single experience, sometimes that really kind of defines how we think about a category going forward. So we needed to rethink through the patient's eyes, what would be a way that you could apply recharging such that it was an enabler and not something that was disruptive to the patient's life, to keep it forgettable while at the same time maintaining the benefits of compliance with the patient. And so that's really what started the cascade, built on this premise that if we looked at a different way to perform wireless charging, that it could ultimately reframe the way that patients look at the whole situation.
I like what you said there about keeping it forgettable. I think that's like such a benefit to the patient. Kent, I wonder if you could build on that too, or your thoughts about, when the old way of thinking about your technology or this type of technology really needed to change.
Well, we could bring up a lot of examples in a lot of different areas, but I'll stick to neuromodulation for a moment. I think we've made great advances as a field in neuromodulation and showed that it can have, real benefits for a lot of patients. And yet, if we're honest to ourselves about where we're at, our technologies are incredibly primitive relative to what's going on in the brain. It's the early days. We're doing the equivalent of trying to make our computer run faster by throwing a roll of coins into it or something. It's just not very principled and rational yet at this point. A lot of it's been very, based on very serendipitous discoveries and at the same time, there's some, immensely important foundational science underneath this. We understand things down at the cellular level, in the subcellular level, in some cases, very, very well. You start moving up the network and the world gets very, very complicated, and still things are kind of primitive. So in terms of where we're going with these kinds of technologies and where we can go, yeah, I think it's all in front of us still. We've just kind of opened the door and made it interesting. And my generation and anybody else's here on the phone generation is not going to finish this one. There's a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of innovating to be done. And and I'll echo some of the things Omari's mentioning. These are potentially complicated devices, and trying to make them just fit invisibly into somebody's life is always a challenge of a good medical device.
Yeah. And Kent, I'll stick with you too, kind of as we shift now to thinking about technology as an enabler, not a constraint. I wonder what sort of legacy assumptions did you intentionally challenge when you were building your company? You've talked about kind of these early stages of neuromodulation and the work that still needs to be done. But I wonder if there were any sort of, as you began this process, any sort of challenges any assumptions that you challenged?
Yeah, so I make it a habit early on in a ideation cycle to do just that, is to kind of search around the space and look at assumptions that have been, kind of hidden assumptions that everybody's, relying on. And if you don't challenge them, you just kind of go off and make the same product again. So what are the question I like to ask are, what are the assumptions we're making here that can be challenged, that maybe aren't valid anymore because technology has changed, because new things are available to us. So, back in the defibrillator days, one of the assumptions was, and there were lots of standards written around this and all kinds of things, is this is what a therapeutic waveform looks like. And it takes a lot of energy, and takes a big machine to deliver that energy. And the folks that were, real early at the company challenged that assumption. The reason they challenged that assumption is because a bunch of people out in Minneapolis were making implantable cardiac defibrillators, and they had challenged the assumption about how big a device does it take to defibrillate a heart. And because they were under severe constraints, and necessity being the mother of invention, they figured out that there were more efficient therapeutic waveforms that could be delivered to the heart that would defibrillate it just as well as other kinds of waveforms. And we realized that experience applied to our situation as well. Why don't we take a look? Why don't we challenge the assumptions about what a waveform needs to look at, and our lower power waveforms, would they also work for external defibrillators? And that was really the basis of the company, was taking that assumption, and it was an assumption, codified in the standards we all use. So, here's what a waveform looks like. If you want to ship a defib, have it make a waveform like this. Well, those are great things to have, but they also anchor you to an assumption. And so that was a key one. So I think getting back to, physiology and getting back to, how is your device going to interact with the body and why is it this way? And, those are, those why questions early on where you do challenge assumptions and then you open up the door to new solutions. I think that's really, key if you want to make the first of a new kind of device.
Esther, I wonder what sort of assumptions you were challenging as you've created this company, as you've created Neuroloop. Like what were some of those initial hurdles that you were trying to tackle and do things differently?
First one was surely that we wanted to put the patient and the individual patient into the focus. And as I explained, the vagus nerve is in each and every patient different in composition. So the key question was how to address that and how to enable also the physician at a later point in time to find at each and every point in time of the therapy to find the right spot and the right, we call it preset, so the right combination of amplitude and strength to stimulate the patient in the right spot. And the biggest technology hurdle was indeed every cuff electrode was made of silicone. And so we jumped into something new and decided to go for a new polymer, which was also challenging for us. And this is polyimide, which is capable to be used with photolithographic methods. So that was a huge part of the journey. The other one, which is not that back to the beginning of the company, was when we started a joint development with our partner Merck, and we looked at all the indications that we can potentially treat with vagus nerve stimulation, but so far there are only activating stimulation therapies out there in the market. So, and indications that are treated because you enhance the action potentials over time. And we asked ourselves with our partner, what if we could block the stimulus completely over the nerve and therefore inhibit the transmitter release at the end plate of the neuron? So that was technically very challenging, and we are working since 2021 on this project, but we now succeeded in a proof of concept to block the vagus nerve. And it's going to a GLP study this year. Unfortunately, the indication is undisclosed, so that will be the next step after hypertension. And that's also a huge step because it really broadens and widens the area of indications we can treat with this technology.
So you've been doing blocks also, not just stim. Yeah, that's
on our way. On our way, yes.
I think that's I did a lot of work with Galvani on their program, by the way. So I appreciate the challenges of putting together good cuff electrodes and being selective stim and all those things. Those are and it's a really fascinating area when you start looking into all the things you might do. I mean, talk about challenging assumptions. The idea that we were out of targets. No way. There's all kinds of targets there.
Right. So. Yeah. And I think the evolution in material science with additional understanding of physiology and electrophysiology really helped to drive that. I would be curious for both of you who are targeting patient populations that are definitely in need of new options, hypertension and epilepsy just being huge diseases that are obviously impacting a lot of patients around the world. And those are heterogeneous populations. Sort of to Esther's point, how do you think about where you would start in terms of determining which patient cohorts you would want to address first? Obviously, you're both going through the process of investigation at the moment. So that's always a great question as you challenge assumptions and you look to introduce new technology. How do you determine in these heterogeneous populations how to select the first cohorts that you'll try to treat?
For us, at the very beginning, the question was, okay, we have a technology, we have an idea, but what indication are we going for? And the idea was, hypertension is something, if we apply it, then we can immediately show that our device has an effect. We can directly see if the blood pressure goes down. And that was the first intention. And for this patient group, we are really focusing at the moment, also in our study that we are currently conducting. So we are already in the clinics. We are focusing on patients with resistant hypertension. So those are patients who are already on free meds and a diuretic, but can't get their blood pressure down. And I think that's also a huge internal motivation for us, because this subgroup of patients is, even though they're taking the meds, they have such high blood pressure that, and they have not so many other options out there. So this is, the patients we are targeting.
I kind of divide the world of medical device opportunities in a couple groups. One is analyze the landscape and come up with an unmet need and go after it kind of thing. Another one is you find out what research is going on in different labs out there and where they have found an unmet need, and they're already targeting a population, and hopefully they've got some data, some preliminary clinical data, and depending on the program, the other element then it becomes can you gather resources to pursue the program? So something that's gonna something like neuromodulation is relatively capital intensive, and to justify the investment you may need existing clinical data. And then so in the case of Cadence, for example, Mayo Clinic had done a lot of work with patients already, and had kind of identified patients that would be kind of in the treatable group, if you will. And so we had that as kind of starting knowledge, and that was required again because it was these are fairly expensive programs. If I had if it was a different set of boundary conditions, you can look at it differently.
Well, Omari, I would turn the question then back to you too, that maybe that you asked Esther and Kent, or maybe thinking just about rethinking systems and thinking systems change, and really what's possible here for device teams, or how does rethinking systems change what's possible for these device teams?
Yeah, I think another good example that I've been close to in evolution and material science is a big one, but really kind of the discovery of the applications of nitinol within the space have been really important in terms of challenging assumptions. So it's been for a long time now, we've been trying to replicate open heart procedures in a more closed way. So they're minimally invasive techniques using the venous anatomy, for example. And that has required really the evolution of material science to be able to have devices that can be collapsed into very small diameters, placed through the vasculature to the targeted sites. First really focusing on cardiac, but now we're seeing a lot of that even extending into neuro, and then essentially being able to deploy devices that almost have kind of a memory to them, a shape to them, and certainly a structure to them, and then allowing for treatment. So that discovery has been a major, I would say, wind in terms of driving forward innovation to allow for more minimally invasive approaches that previously people would have thought were impossible. So I think as we continue to explore unmet needs, to Kent's point, the need probably isn't changing, but the technology is progressing. And I think the other thing we're seeing in our space of MedTech, and I'd be curious on how Esther and Kent are looking at this, is MedTech is evolving, but broader tech is evolving at the same time. And certainly approaches in terms of aggregating data at a very rapid pace and being able to deploy the data in a way that allows for more targeted therapies and individualized therapies is so important to the field right now. Esther discovered within the vagus nerve that it's very heterogeneous, and maybe if you're more specific in targeting, you could get better outcomes and better results. I think also there's the opportunity to add intelligence to our therapies to allow for more individualized treatment and leveraging what some of our deep tech colleagues have been working on for some time now.
You kind of brushing up against a point that I think is important for us to acknowledge, which is we're not, in medical device, we're often not the technology driver as much as the technology recipient. Things are getting, we didn't invent the transistor, but we sure use a lot of them. And, Moore's law wasn't built in our field, but it applies to us. And so we, the cell phone revolution and all the packaging and integration and making things small, and the advancements in batteries that are now impacting all of our implantable device, all these things we're kind of the recipients of it. But I think that means we have to be students of what's going on outside medical devices, because that's where a lot of our kind of material science and electronic and other kinds of advancements are going to come from.
Esther, I wonder how you're thinking, to Omari's point, about how are you thinking about data and introducing intelligence into your company?
For us, like for everyone, I think it's a massive impact and drives the whole medical device ecosystem enormously. It shifts from more treatment focused world to also prediction and preventive focused approaches, because the data we are generating with our implantable devices, and I'm speaking now for Neuroloop, we hope that we can use them one day to build prediction models and even prevent, for example, acute events and chronic diseases. And but at the same time, it's also something that comes along with huge external complexity. I'm sitting here in Germany, and in Europe we have the Data Act now coming that gives us also a lot to do when it comes to how to store data, how to interact with patient data, how to guarantee that they can provide it in the right time, and also the whole topic of cybersecurity. And at least as a startup, this is a huge opportunity, but a big challenge as well at the same point in time.
Esther, thank you. I think also what we see, one of the challenges in MedTech is that even if the technology works, even if the clinical promise is clear, it can still take years for innovations actually to reach patients, right? So that gap between proof of concept and real world adoption can be difficult to close. I wonder, Ken, I might start with you here. Why do you think so many promising technologies stall between proof of concept and commercialization?
One venture capitalist told me once that when he looks at a medical device opportunity, he thinks of it as a long chain, and every single link has to be there. So the nature of our programs are, I think that's descriptive. All the pieces have to be there. One missing link can kill a program. So we need to, first of all, we need to make a device come together and work, and we need to follow all the rules and design controls and be expert at the reference standards and 1,000 other things. That's a complex task. Then we need to run clinical studies. Anybody that's been in the business long enough knows that there's a million ways to screw up a clinical study, and that's just how it is. We sit around in a conference room 3 years before we run the study, and we make decisions, and then we go do the study, and some seemingly completely innocuous decision we made 3 years ago, spoils the thing for us, wrecks our endpoint or something. And if you make it through all that, then you've got to find a way to get somebody, you got to get an approval, but then you got to find somebody who'll pay you for it. Oftentimes, we're not going after self-pay markets. We're not entering kind of a normal consumer market where we're, in a ecosystem where insurance companies pay for things, and the insurance companies may, the device companies may have signed deals with the institutions to say, well, if you buy a lot of stuff from us, you get a discount. But that means the new company can't break in, and not to mention the training. You've got a new thing, a new way to do something. You've got to convince a whole lot of people to adopt your technology. So you have to navigate the early adopter cross the chasm, middle adopter, late adopter kind of curve. So there's some, typically some real challenging marketing problems. The case of the defibrillator, we came out with a bystander accessible, easy to use defibrillator. Well, nobody had one. How do you convince people they need one? How do who's going to get this? I'm not buying one now and I'm okay. So it's this whole chain of events that you're going to have to be able to put together. And I think if all you think is about is a narrow part of it, you might be missing something important.
Yeah, I think the two big buckets there would be, is it possible and is it predictable? And in the early stages, you're just trying to show that it's possible, that your innovation can really have a positive impact. But then becomes a heavy lift, which is it predictable? And because we're dealing with humans that present differently and are differently genetically and different in terms of age and size and gender, that causes a challenge when you go to predictability. We're not machines. And so to show what's possible is predictable is always the biggest leap. And I think when you're dealing with these technologies that are very complex and trying to treat very complex conditions, and these conditions we're talking about for both Kent and for Esther and a lot that we're working on are chronic conditions, and they're also conditions that we're trying to treat patients after everything else has essentially failed. So to be predictable in those environments and prove it is very, very challenging. And I think that's where a lot of technologies can potentially fall short. That being said, I think what is really exciting and interesting is you have these technologies that are essentially platform technologies that can be applied to multiple indications. And if you can prove success in that first indication, and in this situation, two very strong chronic conditions that are highly prevalent, that have a huge economic burden on our healthcare systems, if you can show that, then you can actually show economic justification for the technology, and then you can build on the platforms. But you have to first show it's possible and then predictable.
And Esther, you've got a unique perspective in Germany. European market's different than the U.S. market in terms of regulation. So I wonder if you might be able to speak to that thought process of integrating regulatory usability and market realities early in this process, really to change outcomes.
I really love the picture that Kent depicted with this chain. We've been founded almost 10 years ago, and at this time there was no MDR in place. So our regulatory landscape changed completely in the course of getting from a proof of concept now into the clinics. And if you're developing a class 3, fully implantable, active medical device, then you are taking some decisions at a point that you are proving in your preclinics and also in your clinics that you can't change along the way spontaneously, because it would throw you back years ago. So Omari and I had that because I'm a big fan of the fast charger, and I would love to implement it in our current generation. But I also said there's no chance, because that would be a massive change, and it's not possible with the cycles we have and we are working in. So and that brings the complexity. You take decisions and everything changes over your way from the proof of concept to the market. And also another thing, maybe also very important for startups, if you start with a proof of concept, you usually start with a small team of scientists and R&D people, engineers. But along the way, you have to change also a little bit the mindset of the whole team to maybe think more about other aspects than just about the technology and what's possible, but what's needed out there, how the market is dealing with it, what reimbursement is out there. Very complex, by the way, in such a fragmented environment like Europe, where you have to look at this for every and each single market. And those are challenges, I guess, most of the scientists and engineers are not thinking of at the very early stage of development.
All very good points. Very complex picture, no doubt. We've talked a little bit about challenges. I want to get into some some more exciting, fun topics as we open it up here to questions in here just a little bit too. And just a reminder to everybody who's listening in that Q&A box will allow you to answer or to ask any questions that you may have for Esther, Kent, or for Omari. But I wonder, Omari, turning back to you, what really excites you about the ability to apply some established technologies maybe to some of these new applications? As you look out onto the kind of the landscape of where you live, what's really exciting to you?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, sometimes technology falls short just because it doesn't have the right target, or we were trying to target too broad. A lot of the clinical trials that in holistically may not have achieved an endpoint. If you do a sub-patient group analysis, there's a target that actually potentially could have worked. So what I'm really excited about is a lot of these applications and approaches maybe have fallen short just because they didn't have the right target, or in other words, just didn't really have the right prediction model. So I think a lot of what we're doing now is trying to allow ourselves to have more precise targeting, more accurate prediction, leveraging artificial intelligence to help us do that, and then be able to, in a more predictive way, drive towards endpoints and results that we need to really show that we can benefit patients and have positive outcomes. So in some cases, it's not that the technology itself was not beneficial or useful. It was just simply that it didn't have the right targets. And as we see the evolution of change happening so rapidly in neurotech specifically, I think that is incredibly encouraging and exciting. And as someone who spent most of his career in cardiac, I think the commentary that I really agree with is that for neurotech and neuromodulation in particular, where cardiac was 20 years ago, meaning that we're at the precipice of a lot of innovation coming through and really having the ability to transform patient lives. And that's very exciting.
Very exciting. Kent, I wonder if you might share some of what you're really excited about as you look kind of out in the landscape and maybe where some established technologies can make a real difference.
I think the reason a lot of us are in this business is not because it's easy, but because we get to do something good for patients. I'm in Redmond, Washington. We have a lot of consumer tech and things, and some of my friends and engineers that have and we've all worked different places, and I'm not trying to badmouth it too bad, but one comment one of the guys made once was, I'm tired of making landfill. Making the next consumer electronic gizmo that's going to have a lifetime of 9 months and then it's out. I got to get it done for Christmas, the Christmas season, then it's gone. We're doing something. There's a bigger mission here, and I'll just maybe I'll provide one illustration, I guess, to communicate the possibilities. But shortly after we got the defibrillator, the HeartStream defibrillator product out on the market, a guy who was I think he was a finance guy, but he also refereed college basketball games. The guy was really in good shape, played in Europe for a while. Anyways, he was reffing a game and collapsed. Sorry, it was after the game. He was at Grand Central Station in New York. He collapsed. They had just taken delivery of the defibrillators. They didn't quite know what to do with them, but then, they kind of got it out and got it on the guy and resuscitated him. And he lived. And I got to meet him, and I got to meet his family, and I got to meet his kids. If you've been in medical devices a while, I really hope you have that kind of experience, because it will forever change you and make you realize that you have a chance to use your talents and your hard work and skills to help other people. And that's just so fundamentally rewarding. So I hope everybody gets that chance.
And really that's really what success is too, I think, as you look at this. Truly look beyond commercial, all that. Like that's,
yeah, we're not doing it because it's easy.
Right. Esther, how about you? When what kind of excites you when you think about applying these established technologies maybe in some new ways?
I can just say to Kent, Yeah, I totally understand it, because that's totally what excites me as well, and drives me each and every day. To bring something to the patients out there that has really value for them, but also that lowers their risk of using it. And I think that's a good point, if you think to build on something up that was already existing, or to somehow de-risk, that you are improving something that already worked somehow, and also to be faster out there at the patient, because maybe it kind of narrows the path and makes it shorter to bring it really out there, and providing something good and de-risk to the patients. Yes.
Well, I want to invite any of our attendees to put those questions into the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll pose them to Esther, Kent, and to Omari. I think there's some questions that I might just start as we kind of open this up for broader discussion. Is thinking about the innovators who are watching this here today, if they're building teams of their own, or they have technology that they're looking to take to the next level, maybe that's already established. What's a piece of advice that you may give to the people here to help them advance this idea, this initiative, wherever they are in their journey of being an entrepreneur? What advice would you give them? Omari, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think that has been hinted at is when you go through the building process, you think of it as innovation, which it certainly is, but part of it is the decisions you take today, you'll have to live with tomorrow. And it can be very easy for you to say, I want to put this together in a combination that works maybe functionally, but practically is not going to work in the marketplace, thinking you're going to be able to tweak it and change it down the road. But what ends up happening is that starts becoming part of your design file. And as that becomes part of your design file, it becomes harder and harder for you to make those initial decisions. So while it can be really convenient to design for today, you really need to kind of think about designing for tomorrow in a way that's relatively sustainable. And of course, you're going to iterate and you're going to want to advance and change for sure. But I think a lot of times innovators delude themselves a little bit into thinking, I'll be able to tweak this. I just need to get something that I can kind of pull together, with masking tape and just try out, versus thinking, no, as soon as I start making some of these decisions, I'm going to be married to them for a number of years.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good insight there. Esther, I wonder what insight you may have from building a company of your own. What advice would you give to any innovators who are watching today?
Try to stay with your vision, and be curious, and try to do things differently, even though it seems to be the harder way. And no matter what, be ready to fail, but retry, and have a long breath.
I have an entrepreneur here in the Medical Alley community who says entrepreneurs stare down the valley of death at least 3 times while they're building a company. Maybe it's more, maybe it's, but I wonder, Kent, per day, yeah, maybe, yeah. Kent, how do you get over that? How do you, when you're at that point where you figure all is, hopeless, for lack of a better word, how do you continue moving forward?
Well, it depends on the problem. Sometimes you burn the midnight oil and you go at it. I think a common problem, I think, for innovators and for small companies, and maybe this is, maybe it's for lots of people, but is that you tend to become inwardly focused. You are looking down a tunnel, and your relationships with other people in the community are incredibly valuable. And it's amazing. It's always been amazing to me. I run into some crazy problem and I'll go, well, let me go look, find out who the expert is in this in the whole world. And I'll call them up and they'll pick up the phone and talk to me, and they're happy to share. It's amazing to me how much we all, if you're, transparent about it, how much people want to help other people out. And so don't be shy about, value your network, value your relationships, make those contacts, reach out. There's smart people out there that will help you. So if you're really into it, into a tough nut to crack, go find some nutcrackers, and there's help out there.
That's really good advice. To that point here, we've got some questions coming in. We have very smart people on the panel. I am not one of them, but I'll pose these questions, and the three of you jump in if I sound like I'm kind of fumbling with some of the words here. But first, we'll start with Michael, who asks, how much do you use computational modeling and simulation to innovate new technologies? And how important is it to use high resolution virtual or digital models of patients in this context?
I think modeling is an important tool. You can, I liken a design process to a ladder. I generally want to see an analytic or modeling kind of approach kind of go up one vertical, and I kind of want to see bench work go up the other, and then I want to tie them together. Those are the rungs. I don't want to see a whole lot of design work done without a theoretical or analytic basis. I don't want to see a whole lot of analysis and simulation done without a bench basis. There's way too many ways to get fooled if you're only going up one alley versus the other. So analytic models can be helpful if applied, like they're powerful, like a drug. You take too much, it kills you. You take the right amount, it helps you. So it's not the end all be all. But if it adds to understanding of the problem, then it can be super helpful.
Yeah, for us, computational models are very important because we're working with an array of devices and we're trying to think about it across an array of different types of anatomy. And so I think the important part is really what Kent is alluding to, which is your computational model or your simulation model then needs to be supported by a reasonable bench model, which then needs to be supported by a reasonable in situ model, and then eventually needs to be supported by when you're doing clinical studies in humans. And I think when you have a strong correlation across those four different segments, then you've got a really powerful tool to continue to advance and to iterate your technology. But it's not easy. It's certainly not easy to have a computational model, which then matches perfectly, it correlates perfectly with a bench, which then matches and correlates perfectly with an in situ and so on. So I think getting a computational model that's linked is really important. And for us, it's absolutely critical to what we do because we want to be able to rapidly iterate without having to do something on the bench or go then do something in situ. And I think we'll see those computational models, especially with some of the tools and capabilities coming out of deep tech, becoming even more prevalent and more important.
Esther, if you had anything you wanted to add as well.
We do the same. We use it quite frequently. I mean, it's de-risking strategy before you go to the preclinics. And I mean, it's quite clear that you don't want to burn money because you didn't use all the other methods before you go into a clinical setup.
Good question here too about the regulatory environment. Attendee asks, the regulatory environment appears to be quite volatile, in particular in the US right now. How is this affecting your planning, either funding or execution?
FDA has a really tough job, first of all. I mean, you look at all the things we throw at them. It's a complicated medical device world out there to try to regulate, stay in front of. And they've got, they're presented with a lot of challenges. There's paths you can take. If you're trying to do the right thing, basically, I found that if you're trying to do the right thing and if you become expert at the reference standards and, the underlying science and you work with some rigor, you should be okay. We've had some pretty aggressive programs and we've had some slowdowns with FDA while everybody learns how to communicate with each other. But in general, it hasn't been that big of a concern. There's been a couple times where, they've had some internal things going on where things have slowed down and we've decided to, go do a study someplace else until they get straightened out. But, they got a lot of challenges, but I also think, the people I know there are trying to do things for the right reasons, the right way. So we seem to usually work it out just fine.
Yeah, I think it's important to start with the framework that regulators didn't get into that industry because it's easy, it's challenging, that the FDA's mandate, which is similar to a lot of the other mandates around the world, is to approve products that are safe and effective. And proving that statistically is highly challenging. So I think the first thing as a builder you have to take into consideration is the fact that this is going to take time. It's going to take a long time. and you have to get somewhat comfortable with that. But the second part is frequent and early communication is very important. And I think all the regulators, FDA in particular, responds very well to that. Early communication to talk about design of trials, to give references. And they're also very open to feedback as well as expert opinion because they really focus on that charter of safe and effective. And I think that continuous and constant communication back and forth is what really allows you to narrow in on what could be predictable for them, although it will always take more time than you ever could imagine.
Well, we are at the bottom of the hour here. I'll leave everybody with this nice note from Renee, who says, "Thanks, everyone. Your insights are very valuable. I'm feeling inspired after listening to this. Thank you for all the blood, sweat, and tears you pour into improving patient outcomes. Have a great day." So appreciate that, Renee, and really appreciate Omari, Esther, and Kat for your expertise and your insights and for sharing your perspectives across the industry here today. I think it was a really valuable conversation and really very much appreciate your time.